Dear audience, I would like to take the opportunity to thank you for listening to my first 2 episodes of Conscious Living. Listeners are from Australia, India, United States of America, United Kingdom, Singapore, Trinidad and Tobago, and Vietnam. In this episode, let's focus on one thing which takes us away from the truth versus our own truth. For some of you, this topic might be too deep. But if you are really seeking change in life, then we need to dive deep into seeking, knowing, and understanding our true nature versus egoistic self. The perfection we seek and look in life is nothing but our ego. The cause of your misery is not outside you, it is you as the ego. The ego mind is insecure and keeps us in constant misery. By contrast, the true self, the truth, is who we really are and is connected to the all that is. Our ego is the main catalyst for our own truth versus the truth. Only when we destroy our ego, we see the truth. We need to burn our ego before it burns us. In life, it is one of the hardest things to do is to let go of our ego. We play roles on the stage of life, but we must not identify ourselves with those parts. Ego is the thought I, but the true I is the self. We must distinguish between the pure I and the I thought. Our day-to-day activities don't stand in the way of inaction and peace of mind. We can remain as a silent witness to all the activities taking place. Time exists only in our mind. It is an idea that appears after the ego arises, but the true self is beyond time and space. So what is ego? Ego mind is the impressions of thoughts and words projected onto us as children from adults that knew no better. Ideas from already negative people. Beliefs that were pushed onto our pure, clean state of being. This ego is what we have learned about ourselves from others, from experiences, and from parents, society, community we grew up in. We have been conditioned since we were kids, and it is important to understand that this is not your real you. It is only what you learn to think who you are, and there is a whole world of difference between that and your own true self or the truth. The ego mind is arrogant and simply wants to believe what was conditioned to believe rather than seeing the truth as it is. How to tell the difference between your true self, which is the truth, and your everyday self, which is your own truth or ego self. The purest part of an individual is the true self. In other words, it is our spirit or soul. When you experience the moments of love, stableness, peacefulness, and pleasantness, that is the truth or true self. On other moments you experience the opposite, like disturbed, agitated, not stable, then you are in the grip of the everyday self or ego self. The truth or true self is self-reliant, evolutionary, loving, creative, intelligent, knowing, seeking, accepting, peaceful, and pleasantness. The ego self is driven by selfishness, panic, uncertainty, impulsiveness, survival instincts, intellect, power, money, and status. I gained a better understanding of how thought and emotion create a conflict between our head and heart. Thought has a certain clarity, whereas with emotion, that takes time. The distinction between true self and ego self is the first step to freedom. Understanding how our ego mind functions, including our intellect, memory, awareness, and ego, enables us to better handle stress and anxiety through an awareness of self. Awareness is not something that we do. Awareness is what we are. Ramana Maharshi explains the nature of our mind and the difference between true self and ego. For him, our minds are our thoughts, and it is these thoughts that create our world. Nothing else exists. When we sleep without dreams, our so-called world doesn't exist. Nothing we have identified with exists. Loved ones, work, family, friends, money, favorites, likes, and dislikes. Everything disappears until we wake up and open our eyes. This is what our ego mind does. It creates our own unique projection of the world. But what if our thoughts are governed by ego rather than our true self? What impact does that have on our view of the world? Of course, we need the mind to survive, just like any other animal on the planet. But humans who have their basic needs met should be able to access our true self rather than governed by ego self. All of us are searching, driven by a deep thirst. But so often the water we think we have found turns out to be a mirage. One after the other, we chase mirages, unable to quench our thirst. But what we are looking for is already within us. We are the ocean, and our mind and body are merely a drop of the water within it. Once we place our ego aside and with absolute openness, we will start to see the truth and the meaning of life. To understand better, I'll share an example of our ego mind in action, which I shared in my book. While you're sitting in solitude in peace, a nice smell comes from the kitchen. Your memory, which is manas, records getting a nice smell. Your intellect, which is buddhi, discriminates what is that smell. Your identity, which is your ego or I, thinks it is cheese. How nice, what kind? Swiss cheese. And your intellect decides, yes, I should have some now. All three happens one at a time, but so quickly that we seldom distinguish between them. Until you have the cheese, your mind won't go back to its original peaceful condition. So, getting back to our natural state of pleasantness and peace happens when we understand our ego mind and ego self versus true self. The mind turned inwards is the self. Turned outwards, it becomes the ego and all the world. The self exists without the mind, never the mind without the self. The ego self appears and disappears and is transitory, whereas the real self is permanent. Though you are actually the true self, you wrongly identify the real self with the ego self. Next time, observe in silence how your ego mind is trying to influence your actions. You will start to see the subtle difference of ego and the truth. In this episode, we went a bit deep to understand ego self versus true self in search of the truth. In my next episode, I'll share about separation, which is an illusion. Thank you for listening to my podcast, Conscious Living. Experience the joy within you. Please check out my book, The True Self. Unlock the chaos in you. It is a timeless journey of teachings from across history and all cultures. A personal journey through universal wisdom. The book is available on Amazon in majority of the countries across the globe. please subscribe to my podcast, Conscious Living, at Spotify for my next episode. Take care of yourself.